Aku woke to the suffocating heat of a Sunday morning. The air was heavy, carrying the smell of damp earth and distant rain. The village buzzed with unusual energy as families dressed in their best clothes hurried toward Holy Stream's ministry. At the center of the village stood the church. Its walls, once a bright white, were peeling and stained with time. A faded banner hung over the entrance, promising, "Your miracle awaits." To the villagers, it wasn't just a building. It was hope. It was where dreams of healing, children, and salvation felt just within reach. Inside, the air was alive with whispers. People exchanged hopeful glances, their excitement filling the space. When Pastor Obi climbed onto the pulpit, the room fell silent. His white robe seemed to glow in the dim light. "Today," he said, his voice commanding, "the Lord will do wonders." The congregation exploded. People clapped, cheered, and shouted in agreement. Sitting in the middle row, Sister Esther gripped her Bible tightly. Her hands trembled. For 10 years, she had prayed for a child. She had fasted, cried, and visited prophet after prophet. Nothing had worked. Pastor Obi was her last chance. The pastor's eyes swept across the crowd. They stopped on a frail boy slumped in the front row. The boy's mother froze as Pastor Obi motioned for her son to come forward. The pastor placed a hand on the boy's head. "Rise and walk," he shouted. The boy's legs shook. Slowly, he took a step. The crowd erupted in joy. People shouted praises and clapped until their hands hurt. But in a dark corner of the church, Brother Jackson watched with a scowl. He had seen that boy running around another village just days ago. After the service, Esther ran to the pastor. She dropped to her knees, tears streaming down her face. "Pastor, please," she begged. "Bless my womb. I'll do anything." Pastor Obi's smile widened. His teeth shone unnaturally white. He placed a hand on her shoulder. "The Lord hears your cries. But faith requires sacrifice. You must sow a seed." "I'll give everything," Esther whispered. Later that evening, she was called back to the church. The small room was stifling with the smell of incense. Candles flickered, casting strange shadows on the walls. Pastor Obi, now draped in a crimson robe, began chanting. His voice was low and guttural, the words unfamiliar. Symbols on the floor shimmered faintly. A cold wind circled Esther. Every instinct told her to leave, but she stayed. Desperation kept her rooted. Jackson had returned to Aku to care for his sick mother, but what he saw made his blood boil. His mother had given all her savings to the church, faith offerings, Pastor Obi had called them. Determined to find the truth, Jackson began attending services. He noticed familiar faces in repeated miracles and clever tricks in the pastor's sermons. One night, he saw Deacon Jonah sneaking into the forest with baskets of offerings. The next day, he went to Mama Ifeoma, a respected elder in the village. Her face darkened as he described what he had seen. "That cave," she said softly, "is the sanctuary of no return. Spirits live there. They grant power but demand terrible sacrifices." Jackson felt his stomach churn. "And Pastor Obi?" Mama Ifeoma's voice dropped. "He isn't a man of God. He trades with those spirits. His miracles are their work." Jackson told Esther everything. Though hesitant, she agreed to help. She continued her private sessions, pretending to trust the pastor. One night, behind a curtain in the church through the flickering candlelight, she saw Pastor Obi kneeling before a swirling shadow. His voice trembled as he chanted. The shadow hissed, demanding more sacrifices. Tears streamed down Esther's face. She fled the church, her faith shattered. Under the cover of night, Jackson, Esther, and Mama Ifeoma ventured into the forest. The deeper they went, the colder the air grew. At last, they saw it, the glowing entrance of the cave. Just as they reached it, a figure stepped out. Its body shimmered like sunlight on water. "You seek what you do not understand," it said, its voice ant and heavy. "We seek the truth," Jackson replied firmly. The figure stepped aside, letting them in. Inside, the cave was a nightmare. Skulls lined the walls. Altars were stained with dried blood. The air pulsed with something dark and alive. At the center stood Pastor Obi, his arms raised. Shadows swirled around him like living creatures. "You dare disturb me?" he bellowed, his eyes glowing. Jackson stepped forward. "Your lies end here." The shadows surged toward them, but Mama Ifeoma began chanting. Her voice shook, but the words were steady. The spirits hesitated. Then, suddenly, they turned on Pastor Obi. His screams echoed as they dragged him into the swirling darkness. The cave trembled. The walls began to collapse. Jackson grabbed Esther's hand, and they ran. Behind them, the cave caved in, swallowing Pastor Obi forever. In the weeks that followed, Holy Stream's ministry was abandoned. The villagers, once blinded by desperation, began to rebuild their lives. Esther adopted an orphan boy, finally finding the family she had prayed for. Jackson left for the city but made sure his mother was cared for before he went. Mama Ifeoma became the village storyteller. She warned others of the dangers of false prophets. "Not everyone who preaches brings light," she would say. "Be careful, my children. And never trade your soul for a miracle."